And now on to today's speaker. And to introduce today's speaker, it's my extreme pleasure to introduce someone who, of all the alumni I have met today from Whitman, is my favorite vocalist, Margie Boulay.
Everything I know about singing I learned at Whitman College. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today to introduce one of my favorite people. I first met Tom Cronin when I served on the Presidential Selection Committee for Whitman College 3 years ago. And at the time, he held the McHugh Professorship of American Institutions and Leadership at the Colorado College in Colorado Springs. I knew he was an extremely popular member of their faculty because I made a lot of phone calls to the college as part of the selection process. And I remember in particular one janitor just raving about what a fabulous guy he was, so we picked him. He's accomplished amazing things in my alma mater in the last 3 years. As a matter of fact, in this week's U.S. News and World Report, Whitman is cited as one of the top national liberal arts colleges for value. It's the only Northwest college to be cited in that article. Also recently, it was featured in a book written by the former New York Times education writer, Lauren Pope. The book is Colleges That Changed Lives. It was recently cited in a national news magazine as one of the most conservative colleges in the nation. On the other hand, on the left hand, in this month's edition of Mother Jones magazine, it was cited as one of the top colleges for social and civic involvement. So there's something for everybody at Whitman. Also this year, Whitman College had more young scholars selected for the prestigious Thomas J. Watson Fellowships than any other college in the nation. But Dr. Cronin is a whole lot more than a great administrator. Shortly after he was selected president, we kind of wondered how he'd fit in with the students, and we knew he would be just fine when we heard that one of the dormitories was regularly, the people who lived at the dormitory were regularly getting together late at night in their pajamas, having cookies and milk while Dr. Cronin read them bedtime stories. He's more than an administrator and a friend and a father figure, I guess. He comes to you today as a scholar with a national reputation in the fields of leadership and the presidency. Dr. Cronin earned his PhD in political science from Stanford University and has taught at a number of colleges, including Stanford and Princeton. He was honored by the American Political Science Association with the Charles E. Merriam Award to recognize his outstanding contribution to the understanding of American politics. In addition to professional memberships and editorial work on a lot of journals, Dr. Cronin has also appeared many times on national news magazines as an expert and a commentator. He's the author of 12 books, including Direct Democracy, Government by the People, State and Local Politics, and the State of the Presidency. When I contacted the City Club almost a year ago and suggested that Dr. Cronin would be an excellent speaker about this time of year, nobody had any idea his speech would take place on the very day that President Clinton came to town. But I think the coincidence is fortuitous because I know Dr. Cronin will be able to provide insight into the Clinton presidency and the election season. I am very delighted to introduce to you Dr. Thomas Cronin.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 5 additional minutes to the previous speaker to continue what she's talking about. Thank you very much, Margie. Thank you very much, members of the City Club. I'm honored to be here with you today during this election season to share some comments about the American presidential election activities so far this year. I'd like to first ask, since I am president of Whitman College, just for a show of hands of how many people in this room either studied at Whitman College, had a relative go to Whitman College, or have had a close friend go to Whitman College, just by a show of hands. Very good, very good. I invite the rest of you to come visit us in Walla Walla on your next trek eastward. I want to also announce at this time that the views you are soon to hear are not necessarily the views of the students, faculty, trustees, and important donors of Whitman College. And I also think, in keeping with the political election season, and I noted that there was no grace offered here at the City Club, I'd like to propose that we have a brief politician's prayer. And it goes, and I quote, "O Lord, give us the wisdom to speak gracious and tender words, for tomorrow we may have to eat them." I also, in keeping with the activities that went on just before I was introduced, would like to conduct a secret ballot of this club right here and now about the elections in the nation and also the U.S. Senate election in your state. And to make it an official secret ballot, I'm going to ask everyone, except the waiter, who can verify my reading of the results, to close your eyes and to clap according to your preference of presidential candidates. We will conduct this according to the integrity and honor code of the City Club of Portland, and so I ask your full support. Please close your eyes. I will now ask you, I see some eyes open. You keep count, Mr. Waiter. Seeing all eyes closed, I would like you to indicate by a show of applause your support, if you support the Green Party candidate Ralph Nader. If you support the Libertarian candidate whose name I can't remember. All in favor? Okay. If you support the legalization of marijuana candidate Carolyn Colleen of Flagstaff, Arizona, sometimes known as the Hemp Lady, please applaud. All those who support Ross Perot, please applaud. All those who support President Bill Clinton, please applaud. All those who support Senator Bob Dole, please applaud. All right, now, keeping your eyes closed, moving on to the Senate election. Those who favor Smith for Senate, so indicate by applause. Those who support Rozier for Senate, is that right? Rozier. Well, there you have it. The initiative is supported, I guess, and Clinton has the support of the room, and Smith will go down to defeat, at least if this is a bellwether precinct for the state of Oregon. You may now open your eyes. Please. The speaker does not usually like to speak to eyes that are closed this early in the program. It does not take a political scientist this year to predict most of the outcomes of the elections that will happen 44 days from now on November 5th. I think it's fairly clear to you and to everyone in the country that Clinton, who's leading by around 15 or 16 points, is likely on November 5th to triumph and to be re-elected to a second term. I think that we have 11 governor's races in this state, including one in the Evergreen state next door. And my prediction is that 5 will go Democratic, including the state of Washington. Another 5 will go Republican, and 1 is probably too close to call or unclear to me at the present time. But there'll be pretty much a wash in terms of Democrats and Republicans winning governorships in the country. But the overall impact will leave the Republicans decidedly in control of governorships in the country. Something like 31 to 32 governorships will still be Republican as of November 5th, including, I might point out, virtually all the major states of the country, like California, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Virginia. Absolutely fascinating, the Republican stronghold or strength in the major states of the country. And that came about in large part because of the decisive victories in 1994, but it will not change much as a result of this election. Most states have moved their elections to non-presidential years, so there will not be coattail effects for the most part. I do think in the state of Washington, the results of the primaries came in just 2 days ago, that King County executive and former state legislator Gary Locke will probably win handily over Mrs. Craswell the Republican candidate in that state. There are also major races for the United States Senate. 34, I believe, U.S. Senate seats are currently up. A few more Republican seats than Democratic seats, but there are more retirements among Democrats. I think 7 Democrats retiring, meaning open elections in those states, about 5 Republicans retiring of the 19 Republican seats. It's very hard to call those elections. Many of them are very, very close races, as it is in your state here, although you wouldn't know that from the results of the poll we just took here. But I think it's going to be a very, very close race here and in several other states across the country, including my native state of Massachusetts, and in places like Montana and other states. It's very hard to figure out. I can, by calculation, I think about 20 of the elections are probably already concluded in terms of decisively going one way or the other, or a safe incumbent, a strong incumbent winning. But there are a lot of state elections that it is too close to call, as many as 10, in fact. And I think the net effect, the bottom line, will probably be a net gain of 2 or 3 by the Democrats or the Republicans, or pretty much the status quo, with the Republicans retaining perhaps a marginal control of the United States Senate. In the House, I anticipate and would predict Democratic gains. There are 435 House races. A lot of Democrats retiring in the South in states like Mississippi, Florida, Texas, and so on. Many of those Southern Democrat seats will translate and go over to the Republican column. But up here in the Northwest and the Midwest, I think there'll be several of the recently elected Republicans, the first-termers who came in that decisive election just 2 years ago, are more vulnerable, and I think the Democrats will pick up some seats. And here I think Clinton's victory by perhaps, if he wins by more than 12 percentage points, I think he will bring in, to the extent that he can go over the 12% mark, which he's comfortably at now, I would think it will be an advantage to the Democrats, and they will pick up some seats. Whether they can pick up enough to win the House back and make Richard Gebhardt from St. Louis the Speaker rather than Gingrich is still unclear at this point. And I think in the next 40 days, with the debates and so on, we'll see a little more clarity on that score. But I think the Democrats have a better chance of winning the House than they do of the Senate at the current time. Over 5,000 state legislative seats are up for re-election. The Republicans, again, did very well in 1994, and for the first time in a generation, in fact, the first time in memory, the Republicans right now control a majority of state legislative district races, seats in the state legislatures of America. That will tilt backwards in favor of the Democrats as a result of the November 5th election. And in part that will be due to a presidential election year, which brings out more voters, and the fact that at the top of the ticket, the president will be running in a rather strong way, at least at this time. We would have to predict that. So of those 5,000 seats, it won't change dramatically, but I predict a picking up by the Democrats of several hundred seats, or a few hundred seats around the country, and it is likely to go that way. There are also several hundred ballot issues on the ballot in your state, in Washington, and Colorado, and California, the Dakotas, and Arizona, terrific users of the Direct Democracy Act instrument, and it is very hard to predict those races in advance because there's no D or no R at the end of those measures, and a lot of decision-making by the average voter is made in the last day or two, and often the last hour or two as they go into the ballot box. Pollsters are notoriously unable to really predict with any effectiveness how people vote on ballot measures until really the last few days of a campaign. And the media blitzes and discussions and endorsements at the last minute are crucial in those kinds of elections. I want to say a word about politics and how we look at politicians and politics during election times, before I go in and talk about the factors that are shaping this year's election, or explaining this year's election. We're tough on politicians. We're very tough on those who run for office. We're very tough on presidents. Adlai Stevenson one time quipped that every 4 years we elect a president, and for the next 4 years we pick him apart. And I think it's fair to say we pick them apart as soon as they announce that they're going to be candidates for office. Look at some of the slogans and placards that were downtown today when President Clinton was just a few blocks from here. Bill Clear-Cut Clinton, for example, and other accusations one way or the other on one issue or another. Back where I live in Easton, Washington, we see bumper stickers every once in a while that say, "Impeach Clinton," and her husband too, that the local militia probably put up. One of the slogans this year I came across was a little bumper sticker saying, "Dole is 96." One of my favorite bumper stickers was the following: "Elect Thurman and Helms. Why waste 200 years of experience?" Noting the dullness of the Dole campaign to date, I'm reminded of a 1948 slogan that developed in the state of New York. Only a few of the older people here in the audience will remember that John Foster Dulles, later to become Eisenhower's Secretary of State, ran for the United States Senate in 1948 in the state of New York. And his opponents created a little bumper sticker that went, "Dull, duller, Dulles," to capture the spirit of the moment. We frequently, at election time in America, see and read epithets to the effect of, "Don't vote, it only encourages them." Or, "Old politicians never die, they just evade away." Or, "Politicians divide their time between running for office and running for cover." Or, "A politician is there when he or she needs you." Or, "Thank God only one of them can win." One of my favorite all-time slogans of the past was coined right after the late Edmund Muskie broke down crying in New York, in New Hampshire, I think it was, back in 1972, and his aides developed a little campaign button the next day saying, "Vote for Muskie," for crying out loud. And in Louisiana, a couple of years ago, when Edwin Edwards was running against a Klansman, it was an interesting bumper sticker that emerged: "Vote for the crook, it's important." That was the way they put it there. One of my favorite cartoons this year with this cast of candidates is the one that has a picture of Clinton, a picture of Dole, and a picture of Perot. It has Bill Clinton saying, "I feel your pain." It has Dole saying, "I feel a lot of pain." It has Perot saying, "I am a pain." Then there's the discussion of the issuance of new governmental bonds. There's the Newt Gingrich bond, which they say has little or no maturity. The Bob Dole bond, which doesn't generate much interest. And, of course, the Bill Clinton bond, which has little or no principle. One of my favorite placards this year was generated by the Forbes campaign. It was the one that was held up high when Forbes would arrive: "Fat cats for the flat tax," which we have to thank Steve Forbes for also providing a lot of the information and entertainment earlier in the campaign. It is said that if George Herbert Walker Bush was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, then Malcolm Stevenson Forbes Jr. was born with a complete place setting. And he was the man dedicated to making America safe for inheritance. And but let me go beyond joking about how we joke about politicians and urge the proposition that politics is a good thing, that politicians are indispensable to making our system of democracy work, and that we need to be grateful to those who are willing to engage directly or indirectly in the political process. Politicians are absolutely needed to run a democracy, and certainly the American Republic, whose fragmented power system requires politicians to mediate among diverse factions and build coalitions, and compromise among and within the various branches of government to produce public policy. Politics is important. Politics is good. I often think around this time of the election season that we should hear some editorials and some opinion pieces that are entitled "Two Cheers for the Politician," two cheers for those who are willing to stand forth and raise tough issues. We need to have a bit more praise for those who are willing at all levels to run for office. I ran myself a couple of times when I was younger for different offices locally in the East and for the United States Congress in Colorado, and it was extraordinarily rare that anyone ever came up and said, "Thank you for running." Just the reverse, people would come up and say, "What the heck is wrong with you?" or "What's got into you?" or "Do you realize what you're doing?" or "Why are you considering this path of action?" Rarely do we thank those who run. I urge every one of you, after this election is over, to write somebody, winners or losers, who you think raised issues and performed useful public service. Write them or call them or fax them or email them and say, "Thank you for running. Thank you for doing what is necessary to make the political system work." I've long been a favorite admirer of Charlie McDowell, who writes for the Richmond Times-Dispatch and is sometimes on the Washington Week in Review, who one time coined the following oath that he thought all candidates for Congress and for state legislatures should take. And it puts in perspective a little bit of the role of the politician, because even politicians themselves often condemn their profession. But listen to this oath. He would have them all take the following oath. "I affirm that I am a politician, that I am willing to associate with other known politicians, that I have no moral reservations about committing acts of politics. Under the Constitution, I insist that politicians have as much right to indulge in politics as preachers, single-issue zealots, generals, bird watchers, labor leaders, big business lobbyists, and other truth givers. I confess that as a politician, I participate in negotiation, compromise, and the trade-offs in order to achieve something that seems reasonable to a majority. And although I try to be guided by principle, I confess that I often find people of principle on the other side too. So help me God." And I suggest that the American people will never be satisfied with politicians or with government. We love our country, but few of us love our government, and that's in the American tradition. The ideal politician is probably a fictional character, for the ideal politician would be able to please all of us, everyone, and to make conflicts disappear. Such a person would exist only in an extremely small, homogeneous community in which liberty and rights probably were not honored and didn't exist. But the love of liberty, the love of liberties, invites diversity and therefore conflict. Politicians, as well as the people they represent, have different points of view, different ideas about what is right and best for the nation. That's why we have politicians. That's why we have politics. That's why much of the world, as in Cuba or in China or in Indonesia or a large number of African states, would dearly like to have an opportunity to have choices and to have rights and liberties and to have the messy, tidy system of democracy that we're witnessing this very month. And it is fair to say, too, that our expectations on those who run for office at all levels of government are unduly high. We fault George Bush or Bill Clinton or those who serve us in high office because they have not led us, the almost chosen people, to the almost promised land, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln. John Steinbeck summed it up nicely, and one of my favorite observations. Steinbeck wrote, just 2 years before he died, back about 1966, the Nobel Prize-winning, Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist, "We give presidents more work than a man can do, more responsibility than a man should take, more pressure than a man can bear. We abuse him often and rarely praise him. We wear him out, we use him up, we eat him up. And with all this, Americans, nonetheless, have a reverence and love for the American presidency that goes beyond party loyalty or nationality. And then Steinbeck ends by saying about American presidents, "He is ours and we exercise the right to destroy him." A very eerie line. He is ours and we exercise the right to destroy him. We have assassinated about 10% of our presidents. We have shot at about 30% of our presidents. We are very tough on those who either run for the office or who, in fact, win election to it. And I think in many respects we do so because we abdicate our own leadership and scapegoat those who are trying to provide their form of leadership. We need, in many respects, to be realistically more modest about what it is a president can achieve and more enthusiastic or more vigorous in the notion of what it is we and leaders at all levels of government need to perform. Let me shift to a quick analysis of what's going on in 1996 that leads Clinton to win and Dole to be spiraling downwards. Most voters, most of the time, vote retrospectively rather than prospectively. That's a major axiom of American political science. We vote retrospectively rather than prospectively. We vote on what we've seen during the past 2 or 3 years. It is very hard to know what's going to happen in a Clinton second term or a Bob Dole first term. It is very difficult to make judgments about that and in advance. And therefore, we look at the recent past. And the reality is the economy is doing very well. And the economy generally is the most important variable. In the absence of a Vietnam War or a major Watergate scandal, the economy of jobs, unemployment, interest rates, the deficit, inflation rates, the stock market, those pretty much shape how Americans feel about their government and the choice between candidates. A normal predisposition is to throw the rascals out. But when the economy is decidedly on the upswing, we become a little bit less keen or a little less strenuous in the notion of throwing the rascals out at the top. It is sometimes thought we have a two-term tradition and we always re-elect presidents to a second term. That's not so. Actually, more presidents have served one term than have served 2 terms. In this century, it's about equal. About 5 presidents have been re-elected to a second term, and about 5 presidents like Taft and Hoover and Ford and Carter and George Bush have been asked not to return to the White House as a result of their first term. So there's not really you cannot assume that first terms lead naturally to second terms. And in fact, as someone pointed out just a day or 2 ago, if Clinton wins on November 5th, it will only be the 3rd time since Andrew Jackson that a Democrat has been elected 3 times. Only Roosevelt and Wilson were immediately elected. Grover Cleveland was elected after a 4-year hiatus. He actually won the plurality vote 3 times in a row, but the middle election, because the Electoral College moved it out. The factors at work in 1996 are the economy, the fact that we have 10 to 11 million new jobs, the fact that the stock market has increased 2,500 points. Can you imagine that? 2,500 points. How many in this room would like to see another 2,500 point gain in the next 3.5 or 4 years? Incredible. I mean, that is a remarkable statistic. And I don't think it's ever happened in the life of the American stock market. And I don't think anybody in this room anticipates it happening in the second Clinton term or in the first Bob Dole term. And in fact, we're very likely to have a recession, probably in late 1997, early 1998, in the normal course of events. But the economy right now has been robust. I've been in Boston and New York and Cape Cod and Seattle all within the past few days, and I can tell you that the economies of those cities are booming, just as Portland has a very effective economy, and particularly for those people who vote. You have to remember that only 50% of the people vote, and this year we will have an election less turnout than we did in 1992, with Perot not being a significant factor. He didn't pick up even 1 vote in this august body, and I think that's going to be predictive of his national decline. I think the voting turnout, which was 55% last time, will probably be more like 52% this time. American people are pleased by the economy generally, particularly those who vote. They are worried about Gingrich and Buchanan, who emerged and who become, in a sense, an albatross for Bob Dole. The greatest difficulty that Bob Dole has had of becoming a traditional Republican candidate is saying that he's not a Buchanan and he's not a Newt Gingrich. And fascinating how they have been moved completely to the side stage or to the wings by the Dole campaign. I think also Clinton has moved to the center. It is plain that he got a message, if you will, from the 1994 rebuke of the Democrats in the Congress, which was partly aimed, if not largely aimed at him, and he moved to become more centrist and more of a modifier, and his issues of on drugs and welfare and anti-smoking, the Brady Bill, the welfare reform, indicate a more centrist person interested in more mainstream issues. And Dole's campaign has been a very difficult one. He had a tragic fall a couple days ago in Chico, California, and it was a very sad occasion to see a disabled public servant like Bob Dole toppling off of the podium and falling about 4 feet onto the floor. But in a strange and kind of sad way, it's perhaps emblematic of his campaign. Poor ads, friction on his staff, an inability to connect on issues, a tax cut proposal that didn't seem really authentic to Dole. It was appealing to a lot of people, but it didn't seem as though it was a genuine Bob Dole kind of issue, and it, in fact, was out of character for him to do that, since he's been mostly a deficit fighter. Leaving the United States Senate, which was a bold move, but I think also a move of desperation. Going with Jack Kemp, who is not a close friend or a normal ally of his, but I think a needed thing to kind of rev up the troops in the Republican Party. It's a sad campaign. He was also upstaged by his wife's speech, which was a far better and more interesting speech at the Republican convention than his was. Some people say that we have a choice this year between a charismatically challenged candidate and a character-challenged candidate, and it is fair to say that Bob Dole does not have, he is no Ronald Reagan, he is no John Kennedy, he is not comfortable and doesn't seem to enjoy the give and take of retail and wholesale politics at the national level. He plainly savored it and was superb at it within the chambers of the United States Senate. Absolutely. And he's going through the motions now. He almost seems mechanical, however, and in contrast to that, Clinton is very good at both retail and wholesale politics. He thoroughly enjoys the game of politics. If you walked down and saw the 15,000 people who gathered in this neighborhood to see him this morning, and the enthusiasm they had for him and the enthusiasm that he has for that exchange, it's rather uncommon. I think we'll probably look back and say that he, with Roosevelt and Reagan and John Kennedy, had kind of a political style that could connect on certain issues. And even though he's not an eloquent speaker, that he has the capabilities of a politician that allow him to connect with the American people and to resonate support and to generate support. And I think that's part of the reason he's doing quite well. Another reason is the gender gap. It is absolutely plain that the Republican Party is suffering major losses on the issue of abortion and on family and medical leave, and among single women in particular, who are veering away from some of the messages of the Republican Party, and Clinton has exploited those and taken advantage of those. Another factor that explains the success of Clinton and the difficulties of Dole is that Dole had to run through a bruising gauntlet in New Hampshire and Delaware and South Carolina and in the primaries. Clinton, remarkable for Democrats in a party known for friction, known for fights. Clinton had a free ride in New Hampshire and in Iowa. He had no opponent. He had no Ted Kennedy. He had no Jesse Jackson. He had no person who took him on, particularly from the left. Had he had an opponent on the left, he would have not been able to move more to the center, and he would have entered the general election as a more bruised candidate. But that plainly wasn't the case. Poor Robert Dole had to suffer Buchanan's attacks, Phil Graham's attacks, Bob Dornan's attacks, and an endless list of people who were taking pot shots at him. He had to be away from the U.S. Senate. He looked as though he's not doing that job, and it was a very, and he also didn't have money saved up to do the advertising that Clinton was able to do throughout the primaries, attacking and celebrating his successes and so on. Very important variable. And Clinton and his aides raised money early and quick and intimidated, and it made it a daunting enterprise for the opposition candidates within their own party to run. And that, I think, explains the head start he had and the smoother campaign that he has ahead. I think we also need to pay some tribute to the fact that on certain policy issues, Bill Clinton has enjoyed some success. And I'll point to one area that most Americans will not normally point to, and that is foreign policy. A lot of Americans and critics of Clinton and critics of the Democratic Party suggest there's no foreign policy, or it's incoherent, or it's incomprehensive, or whatever. I would argue that the foreign policy of the United States right now is shaped by a semi-isolationism of the American people, which simultaneously says we don't want to spend money in foreign aid, we don't want to get too involved in the UN, we don't want American boys or soldiers hurt abroad, and we also don't want to pay the price of being a world leader. And Bill Clinton has had to fashion a response to Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia, or the UN, or the People's Republic of China, or Russia, largely based on an enormously constrained, inward-turning America that, in a sense, is not allowing the president, and wouldn't allow a Republican in the White House either, in my judgment, to really fashion a bold or creative foreign policy at this time. And that, given that observation that he has done in Haiti and Bosnia, and in working in UN peacekeeping missions in a dozen or more nations, about as good a job as we could expect of a president in the post-Cold War era, when the American people are really not interested in playing the external role that we probably should be playing. He has made excellent use of incumbency, and I think also on foreign policy, the NAFTA initiative, dealings with Japan and Yeltsin and Bosnia and Haiti and the UN, by and large, have been successfully done. Could any other Republican have won this year? I don't think so. Certainly not those people who are in New Hampshire, and I don't think people like General Powell would be doing much better. The campaign may have been better run, there might be a little more emotion, but I think that Bob Dole has done as well as a Republican probably could have done this year. You'll see, I think, in the next few years, a race between Gebhardt and Gore on the Democratic side and a few others. You'll see, I think, Governor Whitman, Governor Pataki, Jack Kemp, perhaps George Bush of Texas, and some other probably soon to kind of develop Republicans campaigning for the nomination in the year 2000. Let me close by just sharing a few concerns that I have about this election. Number one concern I have is if Bill Clinton wins by a landslide. Cronin's law that I'll share with you is to beware of landslide re-election victories. In 1936 it happened. In 1964 it happened. In 1972 it happened. And again in 1984 it happened. And you will recall that we had constitutional crises of one type or another that emerged within a few years of those landslide elections. Hold on to your wallet and your Constitution if Bill Clinton wins by a landslide. And I don't mean that in an indicting way about him. I just worry about the hubris and arrogance that moves to the White House when there is the semblance of a landslide. And I think this was one of the downfalls of Newt Gingrich, that he overreached and that he misinterpreted that he was in control, that he was prime minister, and everything needed to be done in 100 days or 1 year. And I think he quickly wore out his welcome in Washington and with the trust of the American people. I think If Clinton wins, I hope he wins by a more narrow margin than he currently is ahead in the polls, because I think it would be good for the country. I think, and that may well be why people, including in this state, may split their ballots for Republican for Senate and Democrat for the White House, and why in which you may not see many changes in the United States Congress as a result. A second concern I have is we don't really have a clear indication of what Clinton would do in his second term. He has become far less sweeping and bold and more vague in general, although we can assume that he will be pro-choice, pro-affirmative action in his judicial appointments, and that he will tinker with things and modify congressional measures. But we have not really heard a lot of bold measures in this campaign, and that might be a source of discouragement to some people. On the other hand, rarely are American elections really occasions in which new policies get generated and major problems get solved. I had a friend who was an economic advisor to Franklin Roosevelt, and he remembers an occasion in 1932. Rexford Tugwell was his name. He said to Governor Roosevelt, "Why don't you speak out on all the things you'll do when you get elected and move from Albany to the White House? And why don't you lay out a blueprint of your economic recovery program? Why don't you do this, that, or the other thing?" And after Governor Roosevelt heard this whining and complaining from Professor Tugwell, who was chairman of the economics department at Columbia University, several times, he said, "Rex, I want to tell you that the campaign for the White House is not an occasion for adult education. It's a political fight, and I mean to fight, I mean to win. We'll lay out those things after we win. And otherwise, we're going to be general." And as you know, he actually ran to the right, left, and up and below Herbert Hoover in the election, and it was a very confusing election if you wanted to detect exactly what Franklin Roosevelt would be doing. And I think that's the same kind of thinking and reasoning that goes into the strategy of a candidate like Bill Clinton this year. One has to be concerned a little bit, too, about the Whitewater issues and the Vince Foster suicide, the FBI files, the pork belly profits, the McDougalls, and the Paula Jones harassment suit, and all the things that are accumulating around candidate Clinton. One worries a little bit, similar to 1972, about whether we will elect a president and then wind up having a lot of legal and constitutional and perhaps even criminal or civil matters that will create a lame duck and be injurious to the effective leadership that we need in the White House. I think Democrats and Republicans alike have an uneasy feeling about some of these issues and the accumulation of these issues, as they're not getting much debate in the campaign, but they're there nonetheless, and they give us a little bit of an uneasy feeling. Two other concerns. A lot of the issues that get raised in a presidential election are what might be called wedge issues or phony issues that try to divide groups and parties and often are irrelevant largely to the governance of America. In 1988, for example, the Willie Horton issue and the pollution of Boston Harbor became two of the issues in which George Bush ran against Dukakis successfully. But they were not the issues that were germane to the nation. They were not the issues that later George Bush would govern on. And this year we have UN bashing, for example, which is very fashionable, particularly among the Republicans, but also among some Democrats. We have, to some extent, the faulting of the blaming of Bill Clinton for the drug use in the country, which seems to be not really the central issue. And particularly when Dole voted against the creation of the drug czar, and Republicans voted against a lot of the financial support for the drug activity. There are a lot of both the Hollywood bashing that goes on as another example. The family values discussion often is a wedge issue rather than central. What are the central issues? The central issues are issues that go to the heart of American democracy and fairness. They're matters like income inequality. They're matters of what our foreign policy to China should be. There are issues of poverty. There are issues of defense and missile systems. There are issues of how do we bring the national debt and deficit down. What do we do with prisoners in America? We have 1.5 million people in jail are in prison in this country, another 3.5 million people on probation. We have 5 million people either in jails, prison, or on probation, and it will be certain by the year 2000 it will be 6 million people. That is the same number as the full-time students going to colleges and universities in America. 6 million people either on probation or jails and prisons, and we are paying $100,000 to construct those prison cells and $20,000 to $30,000 a year to pay for those people to be incarcerated in this three strikes you're out kind of era in which they'll be there for long years. This is an issue, rather than the three strikes and out and sent to jail, what about the issues of preventing and getting to the roots of the education and the preparation and the training and the rehabilitation of people like that? And I see some friends here in the audience who are strong leaders in the I Have a Dream program here in Portland, which Whitman College regularly works with during the summer times. You know, we need dozens of initiatives like the I Have a Dream program to get at the heart of this question, rather than to have 6 million in the nearby years and maybe 10 million in later years in prisons, jail, and on probation. And we need to get these people into colleges, if you will, if I can be self-serving, rather than into jails. These are the kinds of issues we need to look at. The bottom line for me is that politics is important, politics is good. Campaigns do raise issues. We are raising issues this year. Buchanan raised issues. Perot is raising issues. Ralph Nader, as well as the major party candidates, are raising issues. It is an occasion to celebrate American democracy every 4 years. And we are fortunate to have some decent people. I think Gore and Kemp and Clinton and Bob Dole deserve our thanks for running. They are good people. They are trying to raise issues. They are having to be politicians, but it's in the nature of the struggle of democracy that they have to often engage in diversionary issues from time to time. But they are part of the American experience. Walt Whitman, the legendary poet of American democracy, one time wrote a wonderful poem called By Blue Ontario Shore. And I would preface it by saying one thing is certain about America, and that is that the celebrations and the traumas, the advances and failures, the good and the bad, are inseparable from the daily lives and hopes and the needs of all of us, of the 270 million or so Americans. Whitman wrote as follows, and I think I'm going to add a few words in the middle of his poem to relate to the theme of my talk. But Whitman wrote, "Oh, I see flashing that this America is only you and me. Its power, weapons, testimony are you and me. Its crimes, lives, thefts, defections, and politics and politicians, I will add, are you and me. Its Congress is you and me. The offices, capitals, armies, ships are you and me. Its endless gestation of new states are you and me. The war," referring to the Civil War, "that war so bloody and grim, the war I will henceforth want to forget, was you and me. Freedom, language, poems, unemployment are you and me. Past, present, and future are you and me." And then he concludes, "I dare not shirk any part of myself, nor any part of America, good or bad." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Cronin. I think your presentation has given us a lot of enthusiasm for what we are about to go through for the next few weeks. So we really appreciate your enthusiasm and support for the politicians who are involved in this. I did have one question I would like to ask you about. You have talked about the fact that the candidates are not bringing up the central issues of our era. But at the same time, those central issues are very complex and are going to take a great deal of discussion and compromise and thoughtfulness in order to solve. Do you think that it would be a problem, actually, if the candidates did focus on the central issues, because then they might be caught in the soundbite solution that they would then be stuck with after the election is over?
That's a good question, and it is true. It's very hard to hammer out compromises in a complicated solution to tough problems in a short speech or in a debate. You will see, you will be disappointed when the debates occur in October between the candidates, because they will have 30 seconds rather than an evening to discuss matters or a few days of debate or hearings. Clinton should do very well in the debates, by the way. I think he is better equipped and better informed and has a style that will be more effective in the debates, especially if Perot is not included in the debates, which looks likely to be the case. But you're correct. It is very difficult to talk. Today, for example, when President Clinton spoke here in the neighboring square, he primarily spent his 20 or 30 minutes reciting the good things that have happened and talking about some things that he has done or is planning to do that have to deal with college tuition or smoking or the environment or what have you. And it was not an occasion where he outlined a bold plan of dealing with the People's Republic of China and human rights and trade issues, or that he talked about how we can speak to what is probably going to be a major issue in the 21st century, and that is the increasing gap between the rich and the poor in this country, the income inequality, which plainly is occurring. We are at the upper income levels in America doing exceedingly well right now. And trade and NAFTA and those things tremendously will reward those who can invest and have capital. But that is not true among the working classes of the country. How does he speak to that in 30 minutes or 30 seconds? Very tough. So you're absolutely right. Second question.
I'm Don Sterling, a member and an erstwhile Whitman parent. If you were on the commission to put people on the debate, would you add Perot and perhaps Nader and other secondary candidates? This really goes to the question of how should we set up our presidential election system?
It's an awkward decision that they had to make. They were told to include candidates who had a chance for the White House, and they polled people and found that no one really thinks that Perot has a chance. On that criteria, Dole perhaps shouldn't be invited either, if you think about it. So you've got to be careful. I'm of mixed minds on it. I like Perot. I think Perot won the first and third debate in 1992. And he hurt George Bush more than Clinton did, because he spoke with authenticity about economic and business and trade matters, and Bush was thrown for a loss, I think, more by Perot than he was by Clinton. But it is, and so therefore he would add spice and wit and entertainment value. More people would watch if Perot was there. On the other side of the ledger, the fact is, this is not a political party. This is a Perot personal campaign. As my friend Dick Lamb found out, it was not the Reform Party, it was the Perot Party, paid for and supported in large part by one individual, and he really doesn't have much in the way of a grassroots organization that's sincerely devoted to winning the White House, and he is using it as a forum to raise issues rather than as a serious candidacy for the White House. So to some extent it's a sideshow, and that I'm sympathetic with Bob Dole and his people who say, you know, we do have a political party, we are interested in governing, and we're not interested in sound bites, we're interested in trying to get beyond sound bites and witty, clever remarks. And so I guess I'm not upset by the Commission's decision, but my hunch is we'll need to debate the format and how we kind of include people. in future years. So it doesn't bother me much either way. I would have enjoyed having him there, but I'm not particularly exercised that he won't be a distracting element in the October debates. Next question.
Ray Polanyi, if I may, I'd like to ask two questions. The first one, you mentioned the danger of landslide.
Yes.
For Clinton. Perhaps it would be appropriate then to vote for Perot or Nader or whatever. I don't think he's in danger of losing if we do that. And then again, that might trim this landslide. First question, what do you think of that? And the second question, Clinton too now talks about a tax cut and a balanced budget. And what do you think of that?
Well, the first question has to do with if Clinton is going to win by a landslide, and I think he will plainly have a landslide in the Electoral College. And it looks right now as though 50 to 54% of the American public are inclined to vote for him. If he does well in the debates, that might go up even higher. Although I think, I don't think it will go up much higher, because I think there's a lot of animosity and questioning and concerns about Clinton as well. But still, if he wins with a 10% or 15% differential between he and Dole, that'll be dramatic. And I think some people ought to think about voting for other candidates, may send some messages. I think that's an individual judgment. And I think on the matter of both Dole, who won a lot of attention for his tax cut proposal, 15%, and yet, fascinatingly, also lost credibility. The reality was even conscientious Republicans who have great reservations about paying taxes have some qualms about whether that was too much and too fast, and whether in fact it would, particularly with a recession likely in the next year or two of some type, maybe even of a mild type, that it would make it much harder to move towards a balanced budget in the next 6 or 7 years. And it was fascinating to me how that did not play, how both the Kemp embrace, which I think was a good appointment, and the tax cut, which he needed to have something bold to make him, neither one have really been able to sustain him. We don't vote for vice presidents, we vote for presidents. We've had a heck of a lot of good vice presidents, like Earl Warren of California was on the ballot with Tom Dewey, or Senator Benson was on the ticket with Dukakis. It doesn't matter who the stature is. We found out with the late Spiro Agnew and Dan Quayle, even hurtful vice presidents seem to not injure most presidential candidates. Gore has been a good vice president. Kemp would probably be a good vice president. On the matter of these tax cuts, you're correct that it's very tempting in the election season for all candidates to talk about tax cuts. It's much tougher to govern the country later on when you sometimes have to do some things that might raise some taxes or go the other way. George Bush found that out. And I think it's because of the George Bush, read my lips, snafu, that Bob Dole hasn't gotten much mileage out of saying, you know, not only am I not going to raise taxes, I'm going to cut taxes by 15%. Most people don't believe, A, that he could do it, or perhaps, or that it's desirable. I'm very honored to be here at the City Club. Please come and visit us at Whitman College in Walla Walla. We're a destination college. You have to make an effort. Like the Michelin Guide says in Europe, it's worth a few detours to come off the road. But please come and visit Whitman College and give me a call or drop by my office. We'd love to have you visit. Thank you very much.
President Cronin, thank you very much for your humor and insight in helping us to remember, particularly during a time when we may be challenged to do so, that politics is a good thing. Thank you, and we are adjourned.